The moment Selena Vale realized her father had sold her life away, she ran barefoot through the crowded hallway of the nightclub, pushing through drunk men, shattered glasses, and armed guards who suddenly turned their eyes toward her like wolves spotting prey. Her breathing shook as she reached the exit doors, but before her fingers could touch the handle, a strong hand grabbed her wrist so hard that she cried out in pain. The entire room went silent. Slowly she turned around and found herself staring directly into the cold grey eyes of the most feared crime boss in New York, Lucien Moretti. He did not shout. He did not threaten her. Somehow that made him even more terrifying. His grip tightened as she struggled against him, but Lucien barely moved, towering over her, while the men around them lowered their heads in fear. Selena begged him to let her go, her voice trembling as tears filled her eyes. But Lucien only leaned closer and quietly said that nobody walks away from a debt owed to him. Then he pulled her back into the club, while she screamed for her father to stop this madness, and the worst part was that her father never looked her in the eyes. He simply sat there shaking with fear, because he knew exactly what kind of monster Lucien Moretti truly was. Nobody in the city ever spoke Lucien's name too loudly. People whispered about him behind locked doors and checked over their shoulders afterward, as if he could somehow hear them. He controlled half the underground empire, stretching from New York to Chicago, and every enemy who betrayed him either disappeared or ended up buried where nobody could find them. Men twice his age feared him. The politicians secretly worked for him. Even the police avoided crossing his path. But the one thing nobody expected was for Lucien Moretti to force the daughter of his greatest enemy into marriage in front of an entire room full of witnesses. Selena could barely breathe as guards dragged her toward the private office upstairs, while music from the club pounded below like a heartbeat, counting down the end of her freedom. She kept begging her father to say something, to fight for her, to stop this from happening. But Vincent Vale looked completely broken. His gambling debts, failed smuggling deals, and betrayal against the Moretti family had finally caught up to him. Lucien had given him months to repay the money. Now the deadline had arrived, and instead of cash, Vincent offered his own daughter as payment. Selena had spent most of her life far away from the criminal world her father secretly lived in. She studied art history, loved classical music, and dreamed of opening a small gallery somewhere far from violence and corruption. She hated guns. She hated crime families. Most of all, she hated the way powerful men treated women like objects to trade whenever business collapsed. But none of that mattered anymore the second Lucien locked the office door behind them. Selena immediately rushed toward another exit, desperate to escape, but Lucien caught her again before she made it 3 steps. This time, he slammed her against the wall hard enough to make the picture frames shake. Her breathing stopped. Fear flooded through her body as he stood inches away from her face. Lucien warned her never to run from him again. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes carried the kind of danger that made her entire body freeze. Selena tried to shove him away, screaming that she would never marry him, but Lucien only stared at her for several seconds before quietly telling her that she lost the right to choose the moment her father betrayed him. Engage in our comment section and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Whether you're in Georgia, Moscow, Ohio, California, New York, Mexico City, Tokyo, drop your location below. And if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our videos. The wedding happened less than 24 hours later, inside a private chapel hidden deep within the Moretti estate. Selena wore a beautiful white gown she never chose for herself, and every step toward the altar felt like walking toward her own execution. Armed men lined the walls while terrified staff avoided eye contact with her. Nobody dared question Lucien's orders. When Selena reached the front of the chapel, she looked around one final time, hoping someone would help her escape. But all she saw were cold faces and lowered heads. Then Lucien appeared beside her, wearing a black suit with silver cufflinks, stained faintly with blood from a meeting earlier that night. He looked calm, controlled, almost emotionless, while Selena fought back tears, trying not to completely fall apart. The priest's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the wedding book. Selena whispered that she hated him. Lucien answered by taking her chin firmly in his hand and forcing her to look directly at him. He told her hate was acceptable because fear and hatred often looked the same in the beginning. Then he slid the ring onto her finger like he was sealing ownership over her soul. At that exact moment, a gunshot exploded outside the chapel walls. Everyone ducked in panic as windows shattered across the room. Selena screamed while guards pulled out weapons and surrounded Lucien instantly. Somewhere beyond the estate gates, rival gunmen had launched an attack against the Moretti family during the wedding itself. Lucien grabbed Selena by the waist and dragged her to the floor, just as another bullet tore through the candles above them. The chapel erupted into chaos. Men shouted, glass shattered everywhere. Selena's heart pounded violently as Lucien shielded her body with his own while returning fire towards the entrance. It was the first time she realized something horrifying. Even surrounded by bullets and enemies, Lucien Moretti never looked afraid. If anything, he looked completely alive. And as Selena stared into his cold expression, while gunfire echoed around them, she suddenly understood that marrying him was only the beginning of the nightmare. The attack on the wedding lasted less than 6 minutes, but by the time the gunfire finally stopped, blood covered the marble floors of the chapel and smoke drifted through the shattered stained glass windows. Selena sat frozen near the altar, unable to stop shaking, while armed men dragged bodies outside one after another. Some of them were bleeding heavily, others never moved at all. The sharp smell of gunpowder filled the air so strongly it burned her throat. Through all the chaos, Lucien Moretti remained terrifyingly calm. He stood near the chapel doors giving orders with the same cold expression he wore during business meetings, as if men dying around him meant absolutely nothing. One of his guards informed him that the attackers escaped through the East Road, but Lucien only replied that nobody leaves his territory alive. His voice stayed low and controlled, yet every man around him immediately rushed to obey. Selena watched him from a distance, trying to understand how someone could remain so emotionless after violence exploded only feet away. Then, Lucien suddenly turned his head toward her, and the second their eyes met, she felt trapped all over again. He walked back to her slowly, crouched in front of her, and brushed broken glass away from the edge of her dress before quietly telling her the honeymoon would have to wait, because now there was a war beginning. That night, Selena was taken to Lucien's estate high above the coastline outside the city. A massive fortress hidden behind iron gates, armed checkpoints, and walls tall enough to keep the entire world out. The mansion looked beautiful from the outside, glowing under moonlight like something from a dream. But the second Selena stepped inside, she understood it was nothing more than a luxurious prison. Guards stood in every hallway. Security cameras watched every corner. The doors locked automatically behind her one by one as she walked deeper into the estate beside Lucien. She demanded to know when she could leave, but Lucien ignored the question completely. He led her upstairs toward a massive bedroom filled with expensive furniture, silk curtains, and a balcony overlooking the ocean. Under different circumstances, the room might have looked romantic. Instead, Selena felt sick standing inside it. Lucien informed her this would be her room from now on. Selena immediately snapped back that she would rather die than stay there with him. Lucien slowly removed his jacket, revealing tattoos running across his arms and hands, then calmly replied that dying was the only way she would ever leave without his permission. Selena tried to push past him toward the hallway, but Lucien caught her arm instantly and shoved her back into the room hard enough to make her stumble onto the bed. He locked the door behind him before warning her never to test his patience again. Hours later, Selena sat alone near the balcony, wrapped in silence so heavy it made her chest ache. She could still hear faint shouting downstairs where Lucien's men discussed the wedding attack, but nobody came near her room. She stared at the ring on her finger, with hatred burning inside her. Everything had been stolen from her in less than a single day. Her freedom, her future, her identity. Now she belonged to a man feared by half the country, and nobody cared what she wanted. Around midnight, the bedroom door suddenly opened again. Lucien entered without speaking and loosened the tie around his neck while dried blood stained the collar of his shirt. Selena immediately stood up, her heart racing as fear spread through her body. Lucien walked toward the bar near the fireplace and poured himself a drink before finally speaking. He informed her that the men responsible for the attack had already been found. Selena asked what would happen to them, though part of her already knew the answer. Lucien took a slow sip from his glass and calmly explained that betrayal only ends one way in his world. The coldness in his voice frightened her more than shouting ever could. Selena demanded to know if he enjoyed killing people. Lucien looked at her for several seconds before saying something she would never forget. He told her men like him do not survive by being gentle. Then he walked closer until only inches separated them, and quietly added that if he had been gentle, her father would have destroyed him years ago. Selena tried not to show fear, but Lucien noticed every small reaction in her face. He noticed the trembling in her hands, the way her breathing changed whenever he stepped closer, the hatred in her eyes whenever she looked at the wedding ring. Yet strangely, instead of angering him, her resistance fascinated him. Most people obeyed Lucien instantly because they were terrified of him. Selena did the opposite. Even trapped inside his mansion, she still challenged him every chance she got. That dangerous courage slowly began pulling his attention toward her in ways he never expected. As Lucien stood beside her near the balcony, the tension between them became almost unbearable. Selena hated how powerful he felt standing so close, hated the way his deep voice affected her, even while she despised him. Lucien gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look directly into his eyes again. He warned her that enemies would target her now, because she carried his name. Yet Selena bitterly replied that she never asked for his protection. Lucien's expression darkened slightly before he answered that it no longer mattered what she asked for. From this moment forward, every enemy he had would become hers too. The following morning, Selena woke to discover the bedroom door locked from the outside. Panic immediately hit her chest. She rushed toward the handle repeatedly, but it refused to open. Fury replaced fear as she pounded against the door, demanding to be released. Yet nobody answered. Hours passed before a maid finally entered, carrying food on a silver tray. Selena demanded to know where Lucien was, but the frightened woman refused to speak much beyond, saying Mr. Moretti was handling business matters. Selena realized quickly that every person inside the estate feared him deeply, though even the servants lowered their eyes whenever his name came up. Desperate for information, Selena tried asking about the attack at the wedding, but the maid only whispered that several rival families were preparing for war against the Moretti Empire. Before leaving, The maid quietly warned Selena never to wander through the west wing of the mansion at night. When Selena asked why, the woman's face turned pale. She simply said, "Terrible things happened there," and rushed out before saying anything else. The moment the door shut again, Selena understood something clearly. Lucien Moretti was hiding secrets far worse than she imagined. Late that evening, Lucien finally returned to the mansion after handling retaliation against the men who attacked the wedding. But Selena heard shouting downstairs, followed by the sound of furniture crashing violently. Curious and uneasy, she carefully stepped out of her room after noticing the hallway guards were gone. She followed the noise quietly until she reached the edge of the staircase, overlooking Lucien's office below. What she saw made her blood run cold. Lucien had another man pinned against the desk, while blood poured from the man's mouth. Several guards stood nearby, saying nothing, as Lucien demanded the names of everyone involved in the ambush. The man begged for mercy, swearing he knew nothing else. But Lucien slammed his fist into the man's face again, without hesitation. Selena gasped softly before covering her mouth, yet Lucien heard her instantly. The entire room fell silent. Slowly, Lucien turned toward the staircase and locked eyes with her. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Then Lucien released the bleeding man, wiped blood from his knuckles, and quietly ordered everyone to leave the room. The fear inside Selena grew stronger when she realized he wanted to speak to her, alone. The moment the office doors closed behind the guards, silence filled the mansion so heavily that Selena could hear her own heartbeat. Lucien remained standing beside the desk, with blood still staining his knuckles, while the injured man groaned somewhere down the hallway after being dragged away. Selena wanted to run back upstairs, but her legs refused to move. Lucien stared at her for several seconds, before calmly asking how long she had been standing there. His voice stayed low and controlled, yet Selena could feel danger underneath every word, as she forced herself to answer that she saw enough. Lucien slowly loosened the cuffs of his shirt and walked toward the liquor cabinet without taking his eyes off her. He poured himself another drink, before quietly explaining that men like the one downstairs understood only fear. Selena immediately snapped back that torture was not justice. Lucien gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes and replied that justice was a luxury people like him could not afford. Then he walked closer, until Selena instinctively stepped backward. He noticed it immediately. Something unreadable crossed his expression before he asked whether she was frightened of him. Selena looked directly at him and answered honestly that she should be. For the first time since their forced marriage began, Lucien seemed affected by something she said. He stood completely still for a moment, then calmly told her to go back upstairs before she saw things she could never forget. But Selena could not stop thinking about what she witnessed downstairs. Long after midnight, she remained awake in her room, replaying the scene over and over in her head. Part of her hated Lucien even more now, yet another part could not ignore something strange she noticed during the interrogation. Lucien never looked out of control. His violence was cold, calculated, almost emotionless. That frightened her more than blind rage ever could. Around 2 a.m, Selena heard loud footsteps echoing through the hallway outside her bedroom, followed by angry voices downstairs again. Curious, she carefully opened her door and moved quietly toward the staircase. This time, she found Lucien standing near the entrance hall, speaking to several armed men covered in dirt and blood. One of them reported that another Moretti warehouse had been burned down near the docks. A second guard revealed they lost 3 men in the attack. Lucien listened silently while adjusting the watch on his wrist, but Selena noticed the fury building behind his eyes. Then another name came up during the conversation. Adrian Vescari, the leader of a rival syndicate expanding across the East Coast. According to Lucien's men, Adrian believed Lucien's marriage to Selena weakened his focus and created an opportunity to destroy the Moretti Empire permanently. Lucien responded calmly that Adrian had just signed his own death sentence. The terrifying part was how quietly he said it. Before Selena could return upstairs unnoticed, one of the guards spotted her standing near the staircase. Instantly the room went silent again. Lucien slowly turned toward her, and this time there was visible irritation in his expression. He dismissed his men immediately before walking toward the staircase himself. Selena tried explaining she only heard voices and came to check what happened, but Lucien stopped directly in front of her and asked why she kept ignoring his instructions. Selena fired back that she was not his prisoner. Lucien's jaw tightened slightly before he suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her into his private office. The force of it startled her enough to stumble against him. He shut the door behind them harder than necessary, then warned her never to involve herself in mafia business again. Selena yanked her hand away and demanded to know what difference it made when everyone already treated her like property. Lucien stared at her silently before answering that if she were truly just property, he would not care whether she lived or died. That answer caught Selena off guard. Before she could respond, Lucien stepped closer and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. The movement felt dangerously intimate after everything that happened between them. Selena's breathing became uneven as she realized how close he was standing. Lucien noticed it instantly. His eyes lowered briefly toward her lips before he slowly stepped back again, almost like he was forcing himself to regain control. The next few days inside the mansion became even more tense. Your security doubled around the estate after another assassination attempt targeted Lucien during a meeting downtown. Selena noticed guards checking vehicles constantly and patrolling every hallway with weapons ready. Nobody smiled anymore. The entire mansion felt like a battlefield waiting to explode. Lucien barely slept. Every time Selena saw him, he was either handling business calls, meeting armed associates, or returning home with bruises hidden beneath expensive suits. Yet despite the growing violence around him, Lucien became strangely protective whenever Selena was nearby. One afternoon during lunch, one of the newer guards accidentally raised his voice while speaking to her. Before Selena could even react, Lucien slammed the man against the dining room wall so violently that everyone froze in shock. He warned the guard never to disrespect his wife again, while tightening his grip hard enough to nearly crush the man's throat. Selena watched in stunned silence as fear spread across the entire room. Lucien eventually released the terrified guard and calmly resumed eating like nothing happened. But the moment stayed with Selena long afterward. Nobody had ever defended her before. Not even her own father. The realization unsettled her deeply. That same evening, Selena wandered onto the balcony outside her room, unable to sleep again. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath the cliffs, while cold wind moved through her hair. For the first time in days, the mansion seemed quiet. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Lucien appeared beside the doorway, wearing black dress pants and an unbuttoned shirt, the tattoos across his chest partly visible beneath the moonlight. Selena tried ignoring him at first, but Lucien walked beside her and rested his arms against the balcony railing. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lucien admitted that he should never have involved her in his war against her father. Selena looked at him in disbelief, because it was the closest thing to remorse she had heard from him. She quietly asked why he did it then. Lucien stared out toward the ocean, before answering that revenge had consumed him for so many years that he stopped seeing people as human. He admitted that when he forced her into marriage, He wanted Vincent Vale to suffer the same helplessness Lucien once felt after losing his own family. Selena listened carefully as his voice lowered with emotion for the first time. He explained that his father was murdered after trusting the wrong people, and his mother died trying to protect him during the attack. Ever since then, Lucien built his empire through fear because fear kept enemies obedient. Selena noticed something important during his confession. Beneath all the violence and control, Lucien carried wounds far deeper than she imagined. For a brief moment, the tension between them softened. Selena could almost see the man hidden underneath the ruthless reputation. But the fragile peace shattered seconds later, when loud alarms suddenly exploded throughout the estate. Red emergency lights flooded the hallways, while guards shouted downstairs. Lucien's expression changed instantly back into cold focus. He grabbed Selena's arm and pulled her inside the room while reaching for a handgun hidden beneath the dresser. Selena's heart raced as she demanded to know what was happening. Lucien informed her someone breached the outer gates. Gunfire erupted outside almost immediately afterward. Without hesitation, Lucien locked the bedroom door and ordered Selena to stay hidden no matter what she heard. But before leaving, he suddenly paused beside her. For one strange second, his hand gently touched the side of her face. Then he quietly told her that if anything happened tonight, she was to escape through the tunnel hidden behind the fireplace. Selena barely had time to process his words before Lucien disappeared into the hallway with his weapon drawn. Seconds later, while more gunshots thundered across the estate, while Selena stood frozen inside the bedroom, realizing the war surrounding Lucien Moretti was finally crashing directly into their lives. Selena stood frozen in the middle of the bedroom, while gunfire exploded across the estate so violently that the windows shook against their frames. Men shouted somewhere downstairs, followed by the sound of automatic weapons tearing through the silence of the night. Her breathing became uneven as panic flooded her chest. For several seconds she could not move, but then another deafening gunshot rang out much closer to the hallway outside her room, forcing her back to reality. Lucien's final words echoed inside her mind again. Escape through the tunnel hidden behind the fireplace. Selena rushed toward the massive stone fireplace near the corner of the bedroom and searched desperately until her shaking hands found a hidden metal latch beneath the mantel. The wall beside the fireplace slowly shifted open, revealing a narrow underground passage disappearing into darkness. Cold air rushed out from inside the tunnel, while the sounds of chaos above continued growing louder. Selena stared into the darkness for a moment, terrified of what waited below. But before she could decide whether to enter, the bedroom door suddenly burst open behind her. Lucien stepped inside, holding a handgun, while blood stained the sleeve of his white shirt. 2 guards followed close behind him, carrying rifles. The second Lucien saw the hidden passage standing open, his eyes locked onto Selena immediately. A relief crossed his face so quickly she almost missed it. He moved toward her without hesitation and grabbed her shoulders firmly, checking for injuries, while more gunfire echoed throughout the mansion. Selena noticed fresh blood near his collar and demanded to know if he had been shot. But Lucien ignored the question completely. Instead, he ordered one of the guards to escort Selena through the tunnel toward the safe house near the coastline. Selena instantly refused. She told him she was not leaving while the mansion turned into a war zone around them. Lucien's expression darkened with frustration before he stepped even closer and warned her that enemies inside the estate were hunting specifically for her now. That sentence sent fear through her entire body. Before she could ask why, another explosion shook the floor beneath them, hard enough to knock books from the shelves. Smoke drifted beneath the doorway, while alarms screamed throughout the mansion. Lucien cursed under his breath and finally admitted the truth. Someone close to him had betrayed the family from inside. The tunnel beneath the estate stretched deep under the cliffs for nearly half a mile. Selena followed Lucien and the guards through the narrow underground path, while distant explosions echoed behind them like thunder. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting sharp shadows across the stone walls as they moved quickly through the darkness. Lucien stayed directly beside Selena the entire time, one hand gripping his weapon, while the other remained firmly around her wrist, as though he feared losing her in the chaos. Selena could feel the tension radiating from him. He kept checking behind them constantly, listening for footsteps, preparing for another attack at any moment. The deeper they moved underground, the more Selena realized how prepared Lucien had always been for war. Hidden escape routes, underground armories, emergency bunkers. This was not simply a mansion. It was a fortress built by a man who trusted nobody. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a hidden garage carved beneath the cliffs, where several black vehicles waited with engines already running. Armed guards rushed toward Lucien immediately, informing him that multiple safe houses had already been compromised. Somebody was feeding information directly to the enemy. Lucien's face hardened instantly. Selena watched him carefully as realization settled into his expression. Whoever betrayed him was someone very close. Before they could leave the underground garage, sudden gunfire erupted near the entrance tunnel behind them. One of Lucien's guards dropped instantly after a bullet struck his chest. Selena screamed as more shots echoed through the underground chamber. Lucien reacted immediately, pulling her behind one of the vehicles while returning fire toward the tunnel entrance. The garage transformed into complete chaos within seconds. Sparks flew across concrete walls, while armed men exchanged bullets through thick smoke. Selena crouched beside Lucien, trembling violently as he shielded her body with his own. She had never seen death this close before. One of the attackers moved through the smoke, wearing tactical gear, and nearly reached their position before Lucien shot him directly between the eyes without hesitation. Selena stared at the body in horror, while Lucien grabbed her face suddenly, forcing her attention back toward him. His voice stayed low but urgent as he warned her to focus only on him and ignore everything else happening around them. Somehow, even surrounded by violence, his words cut through her panic instantly. It terrified her how safe she suddenly felt beside the very man who destroyed her freedom. After several brutal minutes, Lucien's men finally secured the garage. The surviving attackers either escaped or lay dead across the concrete floor. Smoke drifted through the underground chamber, while Selena struggled to process everything she had just witnessed. Lucien ordered the bodies removed before leading her toward one of the armored vehicles, waiting near the exit tunnel. The second they climbed inside, the convoy sped away from the estate toward the coastline roads outside the city. Selena sat silently beside Lucien in the back seat, while flashing lights from armed escort vehicles reflected through the windows. For the first time since the forced marriage began, Lucien looked exhausted. Blood stained his hands, bruises darkened the side of his face, yet his attention remained entirely focused on Selena. He asked quietly whether she was injured. Selena shook her head slowly before asking the question that had been haunting her since the attack began. "Who betrayed you?" Lucien leaned back against the seat and stared out the window for several seconds before answering that he did not know yet. But when he discovered the truth, the person responsible would beg for death before the end. The safe house near the coastline turned out to be an isolated villa hidden far beyond the city. Armed guards surrounded the property, while boats patrolled the shoreline below the cliffs. The place felt quieter than the main estate, but the fear hanging around Lucien's organization followed them there like a shadow. Everyone seemed tense, nervous, suspicious of one another. Selena noticed men whispering in corners and stopping conversations whenever Lucien entered the room. trust inside the Moretti family was collapsing quickly. Late that night, Selena found Lucien alone near the balcony overlooking the ocean. He stood there with a glass of whiskey, untouched in his hand, while moonlight reflected across the water behind him. For once, he looked less like a feared crime boss and more like a man carrying the weight of an entire war on his shoulders. Selena approached carefully, before quietly asking whether he ever regretted this life. Lucien gave a faint, bitter smile and answered that regret changes nothing. Selena looked at him for a long moment before admitting that despite everything, she no longer believed he was completely heartless. That confession caught him off guard. Slowly, Lucien turned toward her with an expression she had never seen before. Vulnerability. The air between them shifted instantly. Selena could feel it. The hatred that once defined every interaction between them was changing into something far more dangerous. Lucien stepped closer until only inches separated them again. This time, Selena did not move away. Her heart pounded violently as his fingers slowly brushed against her cheek. His touch felt surprisingly gentle compared to the brutality surrounding his world. Lucien stared into her eyes for several silent seconds before quietly admitting that she was becoming a weakness he could not afford. Selena whispered that maybe he was becoming one for her too. The confession hung between them heavily. Lucien's hand moved slowly down the side of her neck, while tension built so intensely Selena could barely breathe. Then finally, he kissed her. The kiss was slow at first, restrained like he was trying to control himself. But the moment Selena kissed him back, every wall between them shattered. Months of anger, fear, attraction, and emotional tension collided all at once. Now Lucien pulled her against him possessively, while Selena's hands gripped his shirt tightly. For a brief moment, the war outside disappeared completely. But peace never lasted long around Lucien Moretti. Seconds after they pulled apart, one of his men rushed onto the balcony looking pale with panic. He informed Lucien that Vincent Vale had disappeared from hiding only hours earlier. Selena's father was missing. Worse still, several witnesses claimed he had been seen meeting privately with Adrian Viscari, the same rival leader trying to destroy the Moretti Empire. Selena's stomach dropped instantly as fear returned stronger than before. Lucien's expression darkened the second he heard Adrian's name. Then the guard revealed one final detail that changed everything. According to intercepted information, Aunt Adrian was preparing to trade Selena's father for something far more valuable. Lucien stared at the ocean silently before asking the question already forming inside his mind. What does Adrian want in return? The guard hesitated briefly before answering. He wants Selena. The words hit Selena like ice water pouring down her spine. Adrian Viscari wants Selena. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire from earlier that night. Lucien stood motionless near the balcony railing while the ocean crashed violently against the cliffs below, but Selena could already see the fury building inside him again. The softness that existed between them only moments ago vanished behind the cold expression he wore whenever war approached. But the guard explained that Adrian had sent a direct message through one of the intercepted channels less than an hour earlier. In exchange for Vincent Vale and a temporary ceasefire, Adrian demanded Selena be handed over alive. Nobody knew exactly why. Some believed Adrian wanted leverage against Lucien. Others suspected he wanted revenge because rumors about Lucien's obsession with his wife had already spread through the criminal underworld. Lucien listened silently until the guard finished speaking, then calmly ordered every entrance to the villa sealed immediately. No vehicles in or out, no communication without his approval. The guard rushed away without hesitation, leaving Selena alone again, with the terrifying realization that she had become the center of a mafia war powerful enough to destroy entire cities. As Selena stared at Lucien carefully, trying to read the thoughts behind his cold expression. Finally, she asked the question she feared most. "Would you trade me to save your empire?" Lucien slowly turned toward her, and the look in his eyes answered before he even spoke. The idea itself insulted him. He stepped closer and told her no man alive would ever take what belonged to him. His voice carried possessiveness so intense it sent chills through her entire body. Under normal circumstances, those words would have frightened her. But now, standing in the middle of a war where enemies hunted her relentlessly, part of her found comfort in the dangerous certainty behind them. Lucien admitted Adrian's interest in her changed everything because it meant this conflict was no longer just business. It had become personal, and Selena quietly asked why Adrian hated him so much. Lucien looked away briefly before revealing that years ago he and Adrian were once allies. Together they built smuggling routes, bribed politicians, and expanded power across the East Coast. But greed destroyed the partnership. Adrian wanted complete control while Lucien refused to bow to anyone. Their alliance ended with betrayal, bloodshed, and a massacre that left dozens dead. Since then, Adrian had spent years trying to destroy the Moretti empire piece by piece. Now Selena had become the perfect weapon against him. The next morning, tension consumed the entire villa. Armed guards patrolled every hallway, while Lucien's most trusted men gathered downstairs discussing possible attacks. Selena remained upstairs watching the ocean through the bedroom windows, but her thoughts stayed fixed on the growing danger surrounding them. She hated how deeply entangled her life had become in Lucien's world, yet even more confusing was the growing fear she felt whenever he placed himself in danger. Only weeks earlier she prayed for escape from him. Now the idea of losing him twisted painfully inside her chest. The realization unsettled her more than anything else. Around noon, Selena overheard raised voices downstairs and quietly moved toward the staircase. Lucien stood inside the living room arguing with one of his captains named Marcus Kane, a former military strategist who handled security for the Moretti family. Marcus insisted Adrian's network had already infiltrated several ports and warehouses, meaning another attack was coming soon. Lucien demanded names of possible traitors inside the organization, but Marcus admitted nobody could identify who leaked information about the estate attack. Selena noticed something else during the conversation. Lucien trusted almost nobody anymore. Every betrayal pushed him further into isolation. As the meeting ended, Marcus noticed Selena standing near the staircase and immediately lowered his voice. Unlike most of Lucien's men, Marcus did not look afraid of her presence. In fact, there was sympathy in his expression. After Lucien walked toward his office, Marcus quietly approached Selena and warned her that things were becoming far more dangerous than she realized. He explained that Adrian Vescari never pursued something without obsession driving him. If Adrian wanted Selena personally, but there was likely a deeper reason nobody understood yet. Selena asked whether Lucien could truly protect her against an empire powerful enough to attack fortified estates openly. Marcus hesitated before answering honestly that Lucien would burn the entire world before allowing anyone to take her. Those words stayed with Selena long after the conversation ended. Deep down, she already knew they were true. Lucien's obsession with protecting her had evolved beyond duty or revenge. It had become emotional, possessive, dangerous, and perhaps the most frightening part of all was realizing she no longer wanted to run from it. That evening, Lucien returned from a private meeting in the city, looking colder than usual. Selena immediately noticed dried blood near the cuff of his black shirt and bruising along his jaw. Without thinking, she walked toward him and gently touched the side of his face. Lucien froze slightly at the contact. Selena asked whether he was hurt badly, but Lucien only stared at her with unreadable intensity before quietly admitting she was the first person to ask him that in years. The confession struck something deep inside her. Slowly, she guided him toward the couch near the fireplace and disappeared briefly into the bathroom before returning with bandages and antiseptic. Lucien watched her carefully while she cleaned the cut near his cheekbone with trembling fingers. The atmosphere between them became heavy with tension again. Every touch felt intimate. Every glance lasted too long. Selena tried focusing on the injuries, while Lucien's eyes remained fixed entirely on her face. Finally, he asked why she cared after everything he had done to her. Selena paused for several seconds before quietly admitting she no longer knew how to hate him the way she once did. Lucien's hand slowly closed around her wrist before she could pull away. His touch remained firm, but unexpectedly gentle. He told her hating him would have been safer. Selena's breath caught slightly as he pulled her closer until she stood between his knees beside the couch. The intensity in his eyes made her heart race uncontrollably. Lucien admitted that every day she stayed near him, he lost more control over himself. He confessed that forcing the marriage had started as revenge against her father, but somewhere along the way, Selena became the only thing in his life that felt real anymore. Hearing those words from a man like Lucien terrified her because she believed him completely. Before Selena could respond, Lucien suddenly kissed her again, this time with none of the restraint from before. Months of suppressed desire exploded between them all at once. His hands moved possessively around her waist, while Selena tangled her fingers into his shirt, pulling him even closer. The kiss became desperate, emotional, almost consuming. For the first time since entering his world, Selena stopped fighting the feelings growing between them. Hours later, long after midnight settled over the villa, Selena woke suddenly to raised voices outside the bedroom. Instantly alert, she slipped quietly toward the doorway and listened carefully. Marcus Kane sounded furious downstairs. He informed Lucien that one of their informants had been captured alive before delivering critical information. Adrian Vescari was planning something much larger than another assassination attempt. According to intercepted communications, Adrian intended to attack during an upcoming meeting between several major crime families near the Harbor District. Worse still, someone inside Lucien's inner circle planned to help him from within. Selena's chest tightened as fear returned again. The betrayal poisoning Lucien's empire was still growing closer. She could hear the frustration in Lucien's voice as he demanded answers nobody seemed capable of providing. Then Marcus revealed one final detail that changed the atmosphere completely. Adrian had sent another message directly for Lucien. This time, it contained a warning. If Lucien refused to surrender Selena willingly, Adrian promised he would take her by force and leave Lucien alive long enough to watch it happen. Silence followed those words for several seconds. Then Lucien spoke in a voice so cold it barely sounded human anymore. He said Adrian Vescari had just signed his own execution. By sunrise, the entire villa had transformed into a fortress preparing for war. Armed vehicles lined the property gates, while heavily armed guards moved through the hallways carrying rifles and radios. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody relaxed. The tension hanging over the Moretti family felt suffocating, like everyone could sense bloodshed approaching, but did not know exactly when it would arrive. Selena barely slept after overhearing Adrian Vescari's threat the previous night. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined another attack, another explosion, another moment where Lucien disappeared into gunfire while she waited helplessly for news of whether he survived. The fear growing inside her no longer came from being trapped in Lucien's world. It came from the terrifying realization that losing him would destroy her. She sat near the bedroom window, watching guards patrol the coastline below until the door opened quietly behind her. Lucien entered already dressed in black tactical clothing instead of his usual expensive suits. The sight alone told Selena everything she needed to know. He was preparing for battle. Lucien approached her slowly before informing her that he needed to attend the harbor meeting despite the danger. Several crime families were gathering to negotiate territory after the recent violence, and if Lucien failed to appear, Adrian would use the weakness to rally allies against the Moretti Empire permanently. Selena immediately begged him not to go. Lucien gently touched her face before quietly saying that men like him didn't get the luxury of hiding from war. Before leaving, Lucien gave strict orders that Selena remain inside the villa under heavy protection until his return. She hated the thought of being locked away again, but this time fear outweighed anger. Lucien noticed it immediately. For a moment, the cold mafia boss disappeared completely, replaced by a man struggling with emotions he no longer knew how to control. He admitted that every instinct inside him wanted to cancel the meeting entirely and keep her hidden somewhere nobody could ever find her. Selena asked softly why he didn't. Lucien stared into her eyes for several seconds before confessing that Adrian would never stop hunting them unless this war ended permanently. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, a small act so unexpected it nearly broke her heart. He promised her he would come back alive. Selena whispered that promises meant nothing in his world. Lucien answered quietly that she was the only reason he still cared about keeping them. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Selena standing there with fear tightening painfully inside her chest as she realized how deeply she loved a man capable of terrifying the entire underworld. Hours passed slowly after Lucien left for the harbor meeting. Selena remained downstairs near the living room, unable to focus on anything, while armed guards moved constantly throughout the villa. DeMarcus Kane stayed nearby, coordinating security updates through his phone, though Selena could see the concern written across his face. Around noon, reports finally arrived that Lucien's convoy reached the harbor safely. Relief washed through Selena briefly until another message followed minutes later. Adrian Vescari himself had arrived at the meeting unexpectedly, with nearly twice the agreed number of armed men. The atmosphere inside the villa changed instantly. Marcus ordered additional guards to secure every entrance while trying repeatedly to contact Lucien directly. Selena listened anxiously as fragmented reports came through the radios. Tension at the harbor was escalating fast. Several rival families accused Adrian of violating peace agreements. Others demanded Lucien retaliate immediately. Then suddenly all communication stopped, or complete silence. Marcus kept trying the radio with growing frustration, but nobody answered anymore. Selena felt panic rising inside her chest so violently she could barely breathe. Something had gone terribly wrong. Nearly 40 minutes later, the first surviving vehicle from Lucien's convoy finally crashed through the villa gates, covered in bullet holes. Guards rushed outside instantly, while Selena followed, despite Marcus trying to stop her. The driver stumbled from the vehicle, bleeding heavily from his shoulder. He reported that the harbor meeting turned into an ambush. Adrian's men opened fire without warning during negotiations, triggering a massive shootout across the docks. Several Moretti soldiers were killed immediately. Others scattered during the chaos. Selena grabbed the injured driver desperately and demanded to know where Lucien was. The man hesitated only briefly before admitting nobody had seen him since the shooting started. The world around Selena seemed to stop completely. Marcus immediately organized armed teams to search the harbor district, while ordering the villa placed under full lockdown. But Selena barely heard any of it. Her mind stayed trapped on one horrifying possibility. Lucien might already be dead. Almost 2 hours later, just as despair began settling over the villa, headlights suddenly appeared outside the gates again. Another black vehicle sped into the courtyard before guards rushed toward it with weapons drawn. Selena ran outside immediately. The passenger door opened first, and Marcus let out a breath of relief the moment Lucien stepped out, alive. But the sight of him nearly shattered Selena completely. Blood soaked through his shirt. A deep cut stretched across the side of his neck. Bruises darkened his face, while exhaustion weighed heavily in his eyes. Yet despite his injuries, the second Lucien saw Selena running toward him, his expression softened instantly. Selena threw her arms around him without thinking, relief overwhelming every other emotion inside her. Lucien held her tightly against him for several seconds before quietly reassuring her he was still alive. But Marcus quickly noticed something far worse than Lucien's injuries. Several members of the convoy were missing entirely. Lucien confirmed Adrian had orchestrated the harbor attack with inside help from someone close to the Moretti family. The betrayal happened during the negotiations themselves. One of Lucien's trusted men turned his weapon on the family mid-meeting, allowing Adrian's soldiers to trap them inside the harbor warehouse. Lucien barely escaped after fighting his way out through the docks. Back inside the villa, Selena cleaned Lucien's injuries while he explained everything that happened. According to surviving witnesses, the traitor inside the Moretti organization communicated directly with Adrian for months, leaking locations, security routes, and private meetings. Worse still, Lucien finally discovered the betrayal reached much deeper than simple business greed. Adrian was not only trying to destroy the Moretti empire, he wanted Lucien emotionally broken before the end. Selena quietly asked whether Adrian hated him that much. Lucien looked away briefly before admitting there was another reason behind Adrian's obsession. Years earlier, before their alliance collapsed, Adrian lost someone he loved during a failed operation connected to Lucien's father. Adrian blamed the Moretti family for her death ever since. Revenge consumed him the same way revenge once consumed Lucien. The realization unsettled Selena deeply because she finally understood something terrifying. Both men had spent years becoming monsters because of loss. The difference was that Lucien still had a chance to change. Adrian no longer did. Later that night, after most of the villa finally quieted down, Selena found Lucien alone near the private study, staring at old photographs spread across the desk. One picture showed him much younger, standing beside Adrian during the early days of their partnership. Another revealed Lucien with his parents before violence destroyed everything. Selena approached quietly, while Lucien remained lost in thought. He admitted he barely recognized the man he used to be anymore. Selena gently touched his hand before telling him that, despite everything he had done, she still saw humanity inside him. Lucien looked at her with raw emotion, flickering behind his guarded expression. He confessed that meeting her changed something he thought died years ago. Hope. The honesty in his voice hit Selena harder than any declaration of love ever could. She leaned down and kissed him softly, while Lucien pulled her onto his lap, holding her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly. For the first time since the forced marriage began, the fear between them faded completely. But peace lasted only minutes. Suddenly Marcus burst into the study looking pale and shaken. He informed Lucien that another emergency message had just arrived from one of their hidden informants inside Adrian's network. Adrian was preparing his final move. By morning, heavily armed forces loyal to him would attack the villa directly from both the coastline and mountain roads simultaneously. It would not be a warning this time. It would be total war. Then Marcus revealed the final devastating detail. The traitor inside the Moretti family had finally been identified. Lucien stared at him coldly before demanding the name. Marcus hesitated briefly, almost like saying it aloud made it impossible to undo. Then he quietly revealed the truth. Look, the man betraying the Moretti empire from the very beginning was Dominic Moretti, Lucien's own uncle, the same man who helped raise him after his parents died. The moment Marcus revealed Dominic Moretti's name, the entire room fell into stunned silence. Lucien did not move. He did not speak. For several long seconds, he simply stared at Marcus, as though his mind refused to accept the words he had just heard. Selena watched the color slowly drain from his face, while something dark and broken settled behind his eyes. Dominic was not simply a trusted advisor inside the Moretti empire. He was family, the man who taught Lucien how to survive after his parents were murdered, the man who stood beside him while he built the empire from nothing. Lucien finally asked Marcus to repeat the information again. It was almost like he hoped the answer would somehow change, but it did not. The evidence was undeniable. Bank transfers, secret meetings, security codes leaked directly to Adrian Vescari's network. Dominic had betrayed the Moretti family for years. Selena could see the pain hidden beneath Lucien's cold expression, though he tried desperately not to show it. For a man raised in violence, betrayal from enemies meant little. Betrayal from family destroyed something much deeper. Lucien slowly poured himself a glass of whiskey before asking one final question. Why? Marcus answered quietly that Dominic believed Lucien was becoming weak because of Selena. According to intercepted conversations, Dominic feared Lucien's feelings for her would eventually destroy the empire his family bled to build. So he chose Adrian as the stronger future for the organization. Lucien laughed softly after hearing the explanation, but there was nothing normal about the sound. It carried pure heartbreak underneath the anger. By midnight, the villa had become a military fortress preparing for the final battle. Armed men loaded weapons throughout the hallways, while additional vehicles arrived carrying reinforcements loyal to Lucien personally. Every entrance was barricaded. Snipers positioned themselves along the cliffs overlooking the coastline. The atmosphere felt heavy, with the understanding that many of the men inside the villa would not survive the coming sunrise. Selena stood near the upstairs balcony, watching preparations unfold below, while fear twisted painfully inside her chest. She realized the war surrounding Lucien had finally reached its breaking point. One way or another, everything would end tonight. Lucien eventually joined her outside after hours of planning with Marcus and the remaining captains. Exhaustion showed clearly across his face, yet his eyes remained focused and dangerous. Selena quietly asked whether there was still a chance to escape before the attack began. Lucien looked toward the ocean for several seconds, before answering honestly that Adrian would never stop hunting them if they ran. The only path left was to finish the war permanently. Selena's eyes filled with emotion as she stepped closer and asked the question she feared most. What if you don't survive? Lucien gently held her face between his hands before telling her that if he died tonight, Marcus would take her somewhere safe, far away from this world. Selena immediately shook her head, tears already forming as she whispered that she would never leave without him. For the first time since they met, Lucien completely lowered the walls around his heart. He admitted that forcing Selena into marriage was the greatest cruelty he had ever committed, but somehow she became the only light left inside a life consumed by blood and violence. He confessed that loving her terrified him because love gave enemies power. It created weakness. Yet despite everything, he could no longer imagine a future without her beside him. Selena listened through tears before finally telling him the truth she spent weeks trying to deny. She loved him too. Not the monster feared by the criminal underworld. Not the ruthless mafia king who ruled through violence. She loved the broken man hidden underneath all the darkness. The confession hit Lucien harder than any bullet ever could. He kissed her deeply while holding her against him like he was memorizing the feeling forever. Somewhere beyond the villa walls, armed men prepared for war. But inside that moment, none of it mattered anymore. Two damaged souls who should have destroyed each other had somehow fallen completely in love. Just before dawn, the first explosions finally hit the outer gates. The entire villa shook violently as alarms screamed throughout the property. Gunfire erupted from the coastline almost immediately afterward, while headlights appeared along the mountain roads above the estate. Adrian Vescari's forces had arrived from both directions, exactly as Marcus predicted. A chaos consumed the villa within seconds. Lucien grabbed his weapons while guards rushed through the hallways shouting orders. Selena's heart pounded uncontrollably as Lucien ordered Marcus to take her into the underground safe bunker beneath the villa. But Selena refused instantly. She told Lucien she was tired of hiding, while everyone else fought for her survival. Lucien argued furiously at first, but another explosion thundered outside before he finally realized there was no time left. He handed Selena a handgun instead, and quickly taught her how to release the safety mechanism properly. Selena's hands trembled while holding the weapon, but Lucien looked directly into her eyes and told her something that changed everything. He said surviving this world was no longer about fear. It was about deciding who was worth fighting for. Then he kissed her one final time before the war reached them completely. The battle that followed turned the villa into hell. Bullets tore through windows, while flames spread across the lower floors after grenades exploded near the entrances. Lucien moved through the chaos like a man possessed, eliminating attackers one after another with terrifying precision. Selena stayed close beside Marcus and several guards as they fought through smoke-filled hallways toward the safer underground levels. But Adrian's soldiers had already breached multiple sections of the villa. The enemy was everywhere. Selena witnessed men dying only feet away, while screams echoed through the mansion she once considered a prison. Somewhere during the chaos, Dominic Moretti himself finally appeared inside the central hall, surrounded by armed mercenaries. Lucien spotted him immediately across the burning room. For a moment, everything around them seemed to disappear. Dominic tried convincing Lucien to surrender peacefully, insisting Adrian would spare the remaining family if Lucien stepped aside. Lucien stared at the man who betrayed him with complete disbelief before quietly asking whether any part of their relationship had ever been real. Dominic answered coldly that loyalty means nothing if emotions destroy power. Then he looked directly at Selena and blamed her for weakening Lucien completely. The confrontation exploded into violence seconds later. Gunfire erupted across the hall, while Lucien and Dominic's men exchanged bullets through flames and collapsing furniture. Selena stayed low beside Marcus until she suddenly noticed another figure entering from the shattered front entrance. Adrian Vescari himself. Tall, calm, terrifyingly focused. His eyes locked directly onto Selena the second he saw her. Everything else happening around them seemed meaningless to him compared to finally reaching her. Adrian slowly raised his weapon toward Lucien, while Dominic's soldiers pinned him behind the staircase. Selena realized instantly what was about to happen. Without thinking, she grabbed the handgun Lucien gave her earlier and fired toward Adrian. The shot missed his chest, but struck his shoulder hard enough to throw off his aim. Adrian turned toward Selena in shock, while Lucien used the distraction to attack Dominic directly. The two men crashed violently through the burning hallway, exchanging brutal blows while chaos consumed the villa around them. Selena could barely process what she had done, nor she had just tried to kill a man to save Lucien's life. The final moments of the war unfolded like a nightmare. Dominic managed to stab Lucien during the fight near the staircase, sending both men crashing onto the marble floor. Selena screamed his name, while Marcus exchanged gunfire with Adrian's remaining soldiers nearby. Blood spread quickly across Lucien's shirt as Dominic raised his weapon for the final shot. But before he could pull the trigger, Selena fired again. This time, the bullet struck Dominic directly in the chest. Silence seemed to swallow the room for one horrifying second as Dominic collapsed beside Lucien, dead before he hit the floor. Selena dropped the gun instantly and rushed toward Lucien, while flames spread rapidly through the villa around them. Lucien looked pale from blood loss, but when Selena reached him, he still managed to touch her face, gently like he was trying to calm her instead. Marcus shouted that the structure was collapsing and they needed to leave immediately. Together they dragged Lucien outside, moments before the upper floors exploded behind them, sending fire high into the dark morning sky. Weeks later, news spread across the criminal underworld that both Adrian Viscari and Dominic Moretti were dead after the massacre at the villa. The surviving members of the Moretti empire disappeared into silence, while law enforcement struggled to understand what truly happened that night. Rumors claimed Lucien Moretti died from his injuries shortly after escaping the fire. Others insisted he vanished overseas with millions in hidden accounts. Nobody knew the truth. Selena disappeared from public view completely after the attack, leaving behind the life she once dreamed about, long before the Mafia war consumed everything. Then, one quiet evening, nearly 3 months later, Selena stood alone near a private marina, watching the sunset reflect across the water. She looked calmer now, stronger somehow, though sadness still lingered behind her eyes. Footsteps approached quietly behind her. Before she even turned around, she already knew who it was. Lucien stepped beside her, wearing a dark coat that concealed the scars left from the war. He looked different now. Still dangerous, still powerful, but no longer hollow. Selena stared at him silently for several emotional seconds before tears filled her eyes again. Lucien gently touched her face and admitted that surviving the war changed him. For the first time in his life, he no longer wanted to rule through fear. He only wanted a future with her far away from endless bloodshed and revenge. Selena asked softly whether men like them ever truly escaped the darkness. Lucien looked out toward the ocean before answering that maybe they did not. Maybe the scars always remained. But sometimes love gave damaged people a reason to keep living anyway. Selena smiled through tears before stepping into his arms again, while the sun disappeared slowly beyond the water. And for the first time since Lucien Moretti forcefully dragged her back into that nightclub months earlier, neither of them felt like prisoners anymore.